We've seen some examples of unlimited barbecue offers for certain offensive linemen.
To make sure they hit their weight requirements or something.
The blindside tackle is really important in football. So
Hello, and welcome to In Control, where we learn about the finance of everything. I'm Tash, your host, and I'm also the CEO and founder of Cable, which supports the show. Now, I played hockey, and that is field hockey, the truest form of hockey, for those of you wondering, for the England junior teams, and was in the Great Britain training squad with a lot of the women who went on to win the gold medal at the Rio Olympics. And when I was at university, my teammate also played for the England junior teams. So you can imagine our team was pretty good. And our matches against other colleges, they usually drew a big crowd of between 0 and 4 people. And they were just usually the girlfriends or the boyfriends of the players. College sports in the UK is just not a thing. And so I'm absolutely fascinated by the following that college sport has here in the US. Even more so, I am fascinated with NIL, or name, image, likeness, which enables student athletes to earn money from sponsorship and other deals, and how now, after a new legal case last year, students can actually even be paid by their colleges to play. What do these rules allow, and how are they monitored for compliance? How do colleges handle running the financial side of what now look and feel very much like, multiple professional sports teams within one university? And how can technology actually simplify all sides of this? This is a fascinating area of not only popular culture, but also finance. And to learn more about it, I'm speaking to Richard Scioli, who's CEO and co-founder of Analog, which is using AI and blockchain technology to help universities, teams, athletes, and their partners to streamline the flow of money and accountability in these complex contracts. Richard, thank you so much for joining me. And where I would like to start is in our conversations about recording this podcast, you sent me this great abstract about why you think NIL is so fascinating. And I was wondering if you could just start off by reading that to us, and then we'll go from there.
well, thanks so much, Natasha. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to talk about this chaotic and interesting and evolving very quickly world of college athletics and student athlete pay. But really, what we started to do when we looked into this space was understand really that there's a convergence of a lot of things happening at once. So what's so fascinating is you have culture, sports, media overlaying with this universe of law, compliance, and finance. And then you have the establishment in the United States of a brand new regulatory entity called the College Sports Commission. So we have a first shot at establishing a new regulatory body in the US. We have things in media that are changing very quickly with streamers and live sports. And then we have student athletes at the intersection of it.
Just so fascinating. There's so much to get into today. Let's start really at the ground level. What is NIL? Tell us at the basic level, what even is it?
Yeah, let's go with the definitions first, and then maybe I can give a perception of market size and just the scale of what's happening in college sports. So NIL, as you mentioned, is name, image, likeness, and it's the result of many years of legal battles, first locally and then up to the Supreme Court, where athletes were advocating to receive compensation for different things. As of July 1st of last year, the House versus the NCAA settled a case which allowed for three different things to happen. One was back pay. So athletes who had prior been, stepped aside from earning money from the use of their identity in things like video games and others, were able to receive back pay compensation. One is, as you mentioned, the ability to receive sponsorships. So I can go form a brand deal with Nike. I can post to TikTok. I can get and collect compensation that way. And then the third, very interesting, that's in effect now for this year, is what's known as revenue sharing. So college athletic departments earn enormous amounts of money, and the settlement set forward the ability for student athletes to participate in that. So universities are paying student athletes directly for their name, image, and likeness. And I can talk about the technicalities there and why it's not payroll per se, but functionally it very much acts like compensation in that manner.
That's so, yeah, perfect. Thank you. That sets us up really nicely. Let's start with that first one that you mentioned, which was back pay. Are there some guardrails around that? I mean, presumably like Caitlin Clark isn't going back to the University of Ireland, like getting a ton of money from her time there now. Like what are the guardrails around the back pay?
Yeah, it's just like a large settlement, like a class action lawsuit. You can think of that. So if you're familiar with like mass tort and other types of law, you're going to look at it on a case by case basis. was this individual used in an EA Sports game in 2004, and how much were they, what were the average rates of compensation for a equivalent type of athletic deal at that time. So it really is case by case, and a lot of
Wow.
that's being managed over the course of many years going forward. But it is a way for student athletes who perhaps had some maybe negative consequences through injury and couldn't make it to the professionals, some remediation for the time they played at their colleges.
Okay, very interesting. And so that presumably is like still caught up in courts now about how much and who and when and all that kind of stuff. So just no sort of settlement or agreement on that at the moment.
It's still getting processed
Yeah.
on a claim by claim basis. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so then the second thing you mentioned was the NIL in terms of the students themselves being able to strike their own sort of separate sponsorship deals. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about that. What kinds of things are we talking about? Nike sponsoring you to wear their trainers, their sneakers, and put it on TikTok is the most obvious. Like, are they all financial? Are they all sports brand related? Let's get some examples maybe of what these things are.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really what started in transition in 2021. So you started to see student athletes or their agents cultivate these brand deals. Some of them are very traditional, like I'm going to wear Nike or Reebok shoes as I walk to the arena.
Yeah.
Some of them are very funky. I think one of the challenges with this space, as we really started to dig into the contracting process and the obligations and considerations on a lot of these sponsor agreements,
Yeah.
is they're all over the place. So you may have a fundamental healthcare product that you're promoting on TikTok and saying, I use this face wash. Great, that's straightforward. You may have examples of things that are in kind. We've seen some examples of unlimited barbecue offers for certain offensive linemen. So you tell me
to
how
make
you
to make sure
actually,
they hit their weight requirements or something.
the blind side tackle is really important in football. So, you got to have some girth. And, but to the point of how do you assess market value for some of these things, unlimited barbecue, how would you guess that? But then we've also seen some riffs. You have really two tiers of sponsors, and that creates an interesting dynamic where you have sort of the national brands like the Nikes and Walmarts. But then you have to remember college is really culturally a touchstone for a lot of specific communities. So a lot of the major collegiate brands are in areas in the country in which there are no pro sports teams. So it becomes this real central point of culture and identity for these communities. And it becomes a really important, from a brand perspective at a local level, piece of their engagement with the community. So in those deals, that's where you see some emergence of real creative thinking, where you may have your local air conditioning supplier or your lumber yard. There's an athlete whose name is Decoldest, like Decoldest, and he brokered a deal with a local air conditioning repair and supply company. So you start to get these really creative deals, which is like, hey, we want to support the team, we want to get visibility to the community, but maybe we're not a Nike, maybe we're not a consumer brand, and kind of threading the needle of figuring out what's commercially interesting and valid in the process of getting these deals approved with the NIL Go clearinghouse is a lot of creative work often.
That's awesome. Decoldest is advertising air conditioning. That is amazing. Okay, so big range of things that could be offered through these NIL, like financial, just pure pay, just pure cash payments, all the way through to like food and other things as well. And what are we talking about in terms of how many of the students at a particular college? Is this like, really only the top 4 or 5 athletes in the football team that are able to strike these sorts of deals? Are we seeing, I don't know, gymnasts or basketball players or swimmers at colleges also getting involved?
Absolutely. And I think this has actually been a seminal moment in women's sports as well. So you'll find historically over the past few years, gymnast at LSU, Livy Dunn, was sort of the market leader in NIL value, deriving 9, 10, $11 million worth of sponsorship agreements through her social presence. So this is where sports and celebrity culture are really kind of colliding.
Yep.
You have, Caitlin Clark and Livy Dunn and others with millions of Instagram followers or hundreds of thousands of TikTok followers in other arenas. So you are seeing the sponsorship dollars shift into a lot of the sports that are outside of maybe the core revenue drivers for an athletic department. About 75% of the athletic department revenue is driven from football, if they have a major football program. And usually the rest of that balance comes from basketball, both men's and women's in that category. But you really are seeing an emergence of like an entrepreneurial class, particularly led by female athletes in the US, to find these sponsor deals, cultivate these relationships, and sort of elevate themselves, and in process elevating the schools.
Interesting. And is there a cap on how much these student athletes can make from that second bucket, which is, these external sponsorship deals that they go find?
So this is a great question, and it's unique to college sports. So you have these two buckets. You have revenue sharing, which is the university's paying me, and then you have the universe of NIL sponsorship deals. So that is uncapped. You can
Okay.
get as much as you can get. The nuance, though, is that the College Sports Commission has set up is a regulatory body that was established on the back of the House Settlement Committee, and that came into effect in July. And in partnership with Deloitte, they created this mechanism called NIL Go. And every deal, a sponsor deal that an athlete signs, has to be submitted through this clearinghouse. It's almost like you're submitting a suspicious activity report for every transaction that a bank would have, except you're submitting it to Deloitte and NIL Go and the College Commission. So while the deals themselves are uncapped, what the NIL Go process is looking at is for a sort of acceptable range for compensation and also a permissible business outcome. So
Hmm.
it can't be I'm just paying this person to play if I'm a sponsor. So it's called pay for play. And that is expressly prohibited because they're still amateurs. They're not professional athletes. So it has to be for a commercial reason, and the commercial reason could be promoting my skincare company to social media followers. The commercial reason could be, getting brand exposure, walking through the tunnels of the game. It could be selling air conditioning units, but it has to be very obvious and present. And then the second part of it is establishing some sort of sense of at least bands within some standard deviation of acceptable ranges for things. So if you signed one autograph and you're maybe a bench warmer on the basketball team and somebody gives you $10 million for that, that may cause a little bit of concern to say, actually, maybe this isn't really a commercially minded deal, and we need to reform this or revisit it. So there are guardrails getting established. It's almost like the establishment of a transaction monitoring, anti-money laundering structure, like in real time for a lot of these deals. And one of the biggest issues is there's not a lot of data on what's getting approved or what's not, because everything just happened in July.
That is so interesting. And there's a couple things I want to dig into. Something that you mentioned there is, you can't pay these athletes just to play because they're not professional. I want to let's put a pin in that one. I want to come back to that one.
Yeah.
But the related to that, more on this sponsorship side, I've been reading about NIL collectives where just donors pool money. Where does that fit in? Is that on this sponsorship side?
Yes, it typically is. So the collectives are an interesting outcrop of 2021 till today. And you're seeing a lot of them actually get either assumed into the operations of athletic departments or in many cases wound down. So it's to be determined what happens to a collective. But
Okay.
in the guidance on the House settlement, it's prohibited for anyone a part of the athletic department to go out and source sponsorship deals for the student athletes. So they can't do that.
Okay.
So collective became essentially this like dedicated third party agency. So it's separate from the university, but in some sense is dedicated to actually working with the university to go find sponsorship deals. So typically they're going and pitching brands and saying, hey, you should, participate with, my alma mater Villanova and identify student athletes to find deals with. But the collectives were also, for a time, the location where boosters would also do that. So if you're affiliated with the school, you could put money into it. You could buy, I've seen like co-branded whiskey bottles you can buy, and some of that money gets fed to the student athletes. It's pretty creative. To be determined what happens in the next couple of years with with collectives. We are seeing a migration and a move to either, traditional professional marketing agencies, or we see some schools onboarding like assistant sales teams to go out and find these corporate deals. But I think one of the biggest shifts is you're seeing these athletic departments go from a position where they were traditionally just going out expressly to find big boosters to fund the coffers to support these programs. And now they're going out and identifying more like B2B partnerships. And just with my background in sales, it's fascinating to see
Mm,
the transition and a lot of the missteps, to be honest, as well. So
okay.
that's what the collectives are doing. And, not every school has one, but there are still many out there.
Okay, thank you. That was an important sidebar. I wanted to make sure I understood that. So we've got the first two buckets that we've talked about, this back pay, we've talked about the sponsorship deals, and then this third bucket was the schools actually just paying people to play, which in the second bucket description, you sort of said these athletes can't be paid just to play. They're not professional. So explain exactly what this third bucket is, this revenue share, this
Yeah.
schools actually just paying these athletes. Is that not paying to play?
I'll express how it's technically and legally manifested, because if every word you said sounds like these student athletes are getting paid to play, but but let's start with some perspective. Like, these athletic departments are making a ton of money. So if you're what's known as a Power Four school, you're one of the main conferences with, Alabama, Michigan, Florida. You have typically like a very high profile football team, maybe a high profile men's and women's basketball team. You might have volleyball, gymnastics are, really on the rise in the US too. And the actual top line revenue for these departments is in the hundreds of millions. So you have an annual recurring bucket of hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. And I can explain a little bit on how, the different sources of that revenue at an
Please.
athletic department. And that has existed for a long time. And it's been on a growth rate of, 9 to 10% every year and is accelerating. So these are big businesses, and if you look at on the flip side for an employment perspective, college coaches are making tons of money, millions of dollars. They have Lane Kiffin, who left Ole Miss, and I'll share that story a little bit more. Has a $70 million buyout on his college coaching contract. Many times, because many of these institutions are public, the coach of the football team or basketball team may be the highest paid public employee in that state. So there's a lot of money flowing through the ecosystem, which gets you to, why, student athletes were advocating to get paid. It's because there was so much money in college athletics, and there has been for a long time. So back to what revenue sharing means. It means that these student athletes can participate in sharing of the revenue for that athletic department. So if my athletic department's pulling in $250 million, they're going to allocate a portion of that, called the benefits pool, for revenue sharing with the student athletes. Now, the actual technical mechanism is also an NIL agreement, often called that because it's a little confusing. But in essence, what the universities are doing is using the name, image, and likeness of the student and athletes to promote their athletic programs. And that's how those deals are often structured. So they're not paid for play. They're effectively saying, hey, look, we're already generating all this money on the use of identity of these athletes. So we're going to now call it revenue sharing in this benefits pool. And then we're going to establish direct agreements with the student athletes to pay it out.
Is there
So I'll
and it
stop there, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about it.
is there a cap on how much of the revenue share they can give to these athletes? Is it a dollar amount or a percentage?
Yeah, so it's a hard dollar amount or a percentage. Even more confusing.
Okay.
College athletics is incredibly confusing, and I'm gonna share an example and quiz you on something in a second. But there's a hard cap of 20.5 million.
Okay.
So that is for any school that's very large, like, Ole Miss, Alabama, a lot of the Cal schools. You'll be able to easily get there, and I'll explain again the sources of revenue soon. Or if you don't have 20.5 million, it's 22% of your athletic department's revenue. So it's like an either or. What's really happening at the top line, though, is you're seeing a tremendous amount of money coming through a few different sources. You'll have, many schools have your very high ticket sale
Mm-hmm.
revenue line items. If you look at like Ohio State and Michigan, their stadiums are over 100,000 people. If you think about the largest stadiums in the world, two of the top five are Michigan and Ohio State. So your average stadium in college is often bigger than an NFL stadium. So if you think about an NFL stadium between 65 and 75,000 seats, college stadiums are 30-ish% larger. So they're taking in a lot of folks, and then the periphery of how these towns shut down for games is just wild. So you get a lot of merchandise and like the traditional sources of revenue, but really the biggest source of revenue, which is true in all pro sports as well, is now media rights. The media rights deals are skyrocketing, and every conference negotiates their own media rights deal. So this is just, selling my games to present on Hulu or Amazon Prime or, any other kind of streaming network or local broadcasting. And those deals are getting very large. So they're increasing every renegotiated period 2 to 3 times. So if you take the Big Ten as an example, which is one conference, that's where Ohio State, Michigan play. Their media rights deal is like 7 billion over 7 years, and each school within that conference gets between 70 and 80 million on an escalator that rises to 100 million annually. So you have this position where you're getting $100 million for media rights, and you can now distribute that down to your student athletes. What's very unique and complicated is that every conference negotiates their deal separate from, like, if you're looking at the NFL or NBA, the NFL and NBA negotiate for every team. But you have this dynamic where you have different conferences of different sizes negotiating different media rights deals. So it gets very, very complicated.
Okay, so let me just play this back to you and make sure I understand this correctly. The biggest athletics departments at the biggest colleges in the US, they're making north of $100 million in revenue a year. And there are three main sources of that revenue. The largest by far is the media deals. Then we've got ticket sales and merchandise that make up the bulk of the revenue that these athletics departments make. Those three things are not intrinsically tied to one individual athlete. They are this university, this college. We've got a history of great athletics teams. We've got a history of a great football team or a great basketball team. We've got a bunch of very rich, previous alumni who are donating and they want to come back, and they bring their new company's summer party to like tailgate at a game, whatever it is. And then they are paying their athletes up to $20 million a year to come to their college and play, presumably because they think it will draw more people, they'll win more championships, etc. But the legalese of it is such that technically they're not paying these athletes to play.
That's right.
Well, that seems completely stupid. It seems like they're exactly paying the athletes to play, and it's like lawyers having fun charging millions to somehow make that not correct. What?
Yeah. I'm not in a position to talk about the merit or substance specifically as a lawyer, but
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
so I understand where this revenue is coming from. That's super interesting. So there are the NIL, there's these three buckets. There's the back pay piece. Let's put that aside. That's kind of the least interesting of them. That will be resolved and not sort of move forward. There's the sponsorship part of it for the athletes. No cap on that. They can go and get as many sponsorships as they like, presumably heavily driven by their social media presence. And then secondly, they can earn money, which is not being paid to play, although sounds like it to me. They are being given some revenue share from these colleges, and there's a cap of either 20.5 million or 22% of the revenue. Cool. Okay. And so let's spend just a couple minutes on the compliance requirements that are linked to the NIL. And then let's go on and talk about like some of the actual finance aspects of this. So you mentioned right at the top that there is a new regulator here. Let's talk about some of the compliance requirements around this. What does that look like from a college perspective, from an athlete perspective? Talk us through that.
Oh boy. And I think, it's been, it's moving fast. And there are many examples where I personally have been like, wow, it'd be great if there was a regulatory comment about this specific thing. So, we just experienced the college football transfer portal window, which happened a few weeks back. And during that, there was in the moment guidance. So as colleges were negotiating to recruit new transfers or to retain their team, regulatory requirements change. Like College Sports Commission is chaired by a guy named Brian Scioli. He's a former member of Major League Baseball, but the team's really small. So he was the one person, and now it's expanded to, I think, around 10 people. So it's a regulatory entity of 10 folks trying to catch up to this like super chaotic world where conferences have a lot of influence and a lot of power. And then there's an enormous number of schools. So just if you think about the scope of this project that they're trying to embark on, there's 363 D1 schools. About 70 of those are in the Power Four, which are those main conferences, and those are driving the bulk of the revenue. And there's 175,000 athletes. So if you compare it to like the NFL, where there's 30 teams, or the NBA, there's a wide range. There's a much broader range of athletes, and there's a lot more complexity in the management of it. So conferences have their own governance, but then there is this governance layer now that's been imparted at the top with the CSC after the House settlement. So it's a big coordination problem, and each conference is very different too. So if you're in the NFL, your AFC North is a set number of teams, and your AFC South is the exact number of teams as in there. But within the structure of college athletics, all the conferences actually have potentially different team sizes and different relevance. So if I were to quiz you, and I would say, how many teams do you guess are in the Big Ten? I'll do three. I'll give you three conference names, and I'm going to have you guess how many teams are in each conference. And if you win, I will buy you a pint. So, how many teams do you think are in the Big Ten?
Uh,
Schools, I should say.
I was going to say, so it's not 10. um,
Ah,
I don't know, maybe like 20?
very close, 18.
Oh, bubba.
Uh, now let's try the Big 12.
And when we say the Big 12, we don't mean the Big 12 schools. We mean like the Big 12 conferences.
Conference.
How many?
Conference. No, it's just
How
it's
many?
just one conference called the Big 12, and it
Oh,
has a number of schools in it.
oh, well, that's confusing. I'm guessing it's not 12. And since there are 18 in the Big 10, maybe it's like 22.
16. Close.
Well, that makes no sense. Richard, what's going on?
And last one, the Pac-12. If you get this, I'm buying you pint.
15.
Unfortunately, it's two.
What is that? That
The,
doesn't sound like an
the,
effective league at all.
yeah, the Pac-12 is actually an interesting case. So they were negotiating, because remember, the conferences, not the CSC, negotiates the media rights deals. And they walked away from a deal with Apple because they were worried that they weren't going to get components of media rights revenue sharing from Apple, and also they were worried about not getting like live broadcasts on the major networks. And as a
Okay.
result of that, a bunch of teams just left. They went to other conferences, which you can do.
Huh.
So that's an example of something that some regulatory guidance might want to put together. There's so many coordination problems in college athletics. You have these conferences of different sizes with different, media rights budgets. You have, these coaches who can leave. Like the Lane Kiffin story is that he left. He brought his team, Ole Miss, to the college football playoff, so to the playoffs. And instead of joining that team in the playoffs, he actually left and took a deal with LSU that was just more lucrative.
Just
So,
mid-season,
imagine
like in the middle of
just
the
right
season.
before the playoffs. Yeah, just right before the playoffs, he just took off. So there's a lot of work to do at the CSC level. So I think they're just sort of setting their teeth into like the landscape right now. But you have other examples where the transfer window overlaid with the playoff. So you would have teams who are in the playoffs trying to manage new recruits for the next season at the same time. So I think there's a lot that the CSC can do to manage a better schedule throughout the season, and then also set guidelines for certain activities. We've seen the NFL come out with standards about how private equity can get involved in pro teams. They can have no more than 10% ownership. They don't have a voting stake. It's very kind of structured in that way. We're now seeing private equity enter into college athletics. And I can talk a little bit about the form and function of what's happening at athletic departments as well.
Hmm.
But those are examples where just some guidance would be helpful. Right now, I think the CSC is really focused on compliance reporting as step one. So,
Like
me, I
any
would
like
love.
any good regulator, let's just make people do paperwork and not actually set any
That's
guidelines.
right.
Okay, okay.
That's right. That's right. They're like, just tell us, who you're paying and what, and then tell us what deals they're getting on the sponsorship side. That's basically
Wow.
the step one. And then they're introducing guidance kind of on a rolling basis,
Do you
as we're seeing it.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head how many people are in the NFL sort of management group? Like how many individuals are trying to coordinate and deal with like all of the regulation around the NFL? Presumably
Oh
it's
gosh, it's
hundreds.
hundreds. Yeah,
And there
hundreds.
and there are 10 people at the CSC, the College Sports Commissioner, trying to manage 10x or 20x number of teams and athletes.
Yes,
Okay, that sounds like it's
it's
not going to
significantly
work.
more.
Yeah.
And there's a third bucket. There's a third problem, which is collective bargaining. So, in the NFL, in the NBA, in the WNBA, which is currently being renegotiated, you
Yep.
have a collective bargaining agreement. So
Yep.
the athletes effectively unionize, and they put forward things like an agent cannot charge an athlete more than X% for some negotiated deal. You do not have that in college athletics yet. So the athletes are kind of in the ether. You do see some predatory action. So you see some agent, like some sports agents, take very high rates, like high take rates on deals. Nothing you would ever see, in the world of pro sports. So there's not really the athlete protection yet. There is now, and this is where it crosses over into politics a little bit. You are seeing some momentum in both the Republican and Democratic parties to put some structure and order around college athletics. So we see the SCORE Act, the SAFE Act. President Trump put forward an executive order last year saying we got to figure this out. That was basically the executive order. It was like, guys, this is kind of a mess. Um, yeah. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and I think this year for the CSC has just been like, just send us the data, and
Wow.
we'll start to introduce rules as we go along. But there's some
Okay.
really table stakes stuff that I'd love to see
Yeah.
as a
A,
fan.
a couple of just specific things about the compliance side. How are the student athletes considered from a tax perspective? Presumably they're not employees if they're not being paid to play.
They're not employees. That's right.
So what are they?
So they're student athletes. Many of them are on specific visas that are related to that if they're international students, but they're typically getting just 1099s. Yeah,
Okay.
related to the revenue sharing.
Okay.
Many of them, about 50% have actually set up, 50% is a rough number, but like 30 to 50%, depending on the school, are actually setting up LLCs for themselves as well. So the payments are actually going to business entities for tax
Yeah.
purposes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And so let's move on and talk a little bit about how these college athletic departments are actually structuring themselves, making payments, coming up with these contracts. That feels like a whole big business in itself. Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So the makeup of these athletic departments is really dramatically changing. Athletic departments aren't big, and most of the time they're used to doing another thing, which is like coaching and
Sport.
training and talking to parents and recruiting great athletes. And there's elements of compliance within athletic departments. There's things like Title IX, making sure that you're staying within standards, that you're supporting women's sports on level with men's. But the mass majority of these athletic departments did not have sort of these broad reaching sales teams and legal negotiation teams and compliance teams. So what you're seeing is the introduction of many schools are doing is like a general manager type, which is a really common role in many of the pro sports, where you have somebody who's business minded and focused on how do I determine what student athlete gets what amount of money? How do I manage this new salary, like effective salary cap system, which is the benefits pool? How do I cultivate sponsorship and brand deals? So you have now like some centers of excellence where you're getting general managers on board. You'll have in some schools we've talked to like an actual data strategist, somebody who maybe was like looking at performance Moneyball style and was now like, hey, just tack on money pay to your like job description as well. But it's evolving so fast. And the cycle of what happened was for this season in July, everyone just before the July 1st handover happened, everyone just dumped as much money to student athletes as they could before the new framework came into effect. So this new season, where we've seen just this recent football transfer window, was really like a first run at how do we recruit and retain athletes and use kind of money and payments and also the opportunity for them to receive sponsorship deals as like recruiting strategies. So this year is really for a lot of schools who are ahead of it about setting up their data model. Like what is the value of a tight end in this market? I don't know, right? So it's a
Sure.
very interesting time and place where the establishment of payroll structure is happening for the first time.
And will we then just see students moving a lot more? So there was this interesting case of Darian Mensah, right, who just moved from
Yeah.
Duke to Miami. Talk a little bit about what the details of his particular situation were, and then like how that has all changed with NIL.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting case. It also, to talk about the first, in the first part of this conversation, we were talking about like this isn't employment at will, right? So he actually assigned his name, image, likeness to Duke, and Duke basically filed a claim because on the last day of the transfer portal window, which is a 2 week period from January 2nd to January 16th, he put his name in the transfer window and took a really lucrative deal to go play for Miami, who was just in the college football playoffs. So a very elevated program at this time. They lost to Indiana, go Hoosiers, but he was in the mind to move from Duke, which is historically a basketball school, to go to Miami, which has got historically a really strong football culture. So Duke actually was like, nope, can't do that. We're going to file suit. You got to stay with us, but that's not good for anyone, including Duke or Mensah. And they ended up settling last week, and now he's going to play for Miami. So the transfer window is interesting, and I think in some ways problematic. So in basketball, you can transfer every year. It's like it's a free agency every year, and this is where I think there could be a little bit more of a standard on a compliance front to at least eliminate that ability or to introduce penalties. So if you transferred out of your school, maybe you have to sit out the next season. Maybe you can only transfer once in your academic lifetime. What we're trying to promote, I think, is athletes being embedded in their school and local communities and also getting an education, right? Like these are student athletes that I know their emphasis of this conversation is on the athlete part, but like the chances that you're getting to really embed with the community, which is important for these schools, if you're going to a new school every year, and then the chances that you're also going to have a quality education are actually at risk, I would believe. So that's an example of, I think, a more common sense approach to regulation where we can just say you can transfer once and then a second time, perhaps with the penalty of sitting for a season. But we want to try to keep these kids in schools and keep them, with the programs that they started with as much as possible, I would think.
Isn't that the whole problem with NIL, which is that if you have a 19-year-old child earning $3-4 million a year through their college life, what incentive do they feel to turn up to their class at all?
Yeah. You'll have schools, forward-thinking schools will do a couple things. They'll have eligibility requirements. You have to maintain a GPA. And then they will also introduce a lot of financial literacy. So not surprised. I don't know if you've seen it's a great documentary, 30 for 30 on ESPN. It's called Broke.
Oh no.
But a lot of pro athletes are not, at least at the time of that documentary, which was maybe 15 years ago, not great at handling their money.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of athletes get broke. But I think if you introduce that concept of financial literacy early, we have some schools with the idea of pushing things to like tax savings accounts for kids automatically. You can introduce wealth management. These student athletes are using their bodies at, often some risk, right? Like injury can be a
Mm-hmm.
real risk to future potential earnings in athletics. So we're seeing the introduction of insurance products as an example. So I'll insure my revenue share if I sprain my ankle, and I'll get a little payout to, compensate.
Okay, talk about that a little bit. So the school will pay the athlete even if the athlete can't play anymore, which goes to them not being paid to play if they get
Yeah,
injured in the service of this revenue sharing agreement.
that's right. So
Huh.
we've seen it now on two sides. The school will do it. So the school will insure themselves to be like, I'm paying this athlete. I should insure that payment. So if they get injured, you know, I get paid back. The student athlete still gets their money.
Okay.
And then the student athletes will do it too, which is common in the pros too. If I get injured, like there's a perception of future earning potential that I've lost, and I want to, insure against that potential too. So yeah, you might have it on both sides. And then there is, we've seen some examples of folks asking for things like healthcare as a part of,
Hmm.
their compensation packages as well. So a lot of this is just, so benefits as a category, right? It's an evolving market of just athlete labor.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's dig in on some of the complexities of these contracts. So presumably you're signing a great basketball player. You're not, as a college, just sort of handing them on day one. Here is, you're the best basketball player in the school. Here's $4 million. You're presumably not just doing that on day one. Are there triggers for payment? Like, how do these contracts often work?
Yeah, so from the university to the students, there are typically pay schedules. So it really functions in some ways on a mirror to what's happening in the NBA and NFL. So you may have, biweekly payments, you may have monthly payments, you may have only pay schedules tied to in season. What's a little confusing and nuanced on two matters is that salary cap, that 20 and a half, is across all sports.
Hmm.
So you end up having, and it's across all sports and it's over the academic calendar.
Hmm.
So what it is not congruent with is every sports season nor a fiscal calendar.
Hmm.
So you have a benefits pool that starts from June, ends in July, and you're like, okay. But then you have a football program that just ended in with the playoffs of January, and you're like, those things don't reconcile. So cap management becomes really challenging. So what we're seeing some of the smarter schools do with the pay schedules is they say, well, actually, I want to balance this cap contribution out. So my pay schedule will straddle two cap periods, even though it's like for one athlete for 1 year, so that I can minimize my like sort of cap allocation in the early year and kind of spread it out over the later years. So a lot of schools are playing with those cap structures to make sure that the pay schedules like fit kind of the strategy and allow them to onboard and recruit more players. So that's interesting. The cap structure also at a school level is unique because the NFL is just, it's my Patriots. They got one team. When you're actually looking at all of the sports in your athletic department, you could have 20, 30 sports in your school. And if you're looking to optimize for one particular sport, let's say it's like hockey, we saw Providence College do this. You may go and say, I'm going to spend $5 million on my hockey team. And the average hockey team at every other school is spending one. So I'm actually 5Xing what they're doing. And I can maybe get a competitive advantage. So when we think about those GM roles too, it's not just about the payments and making sure they're getting out. It's also about using the cap structure, which is this kind of like complicated thing with all the teams, in ways that advantage your sports relative to the competition, and how you understand who's paying what to their team. And then how do you understand how much available sponsorship dollars are in your ecosystem is like the third part of that.
And
So you
I
have to balance all three of those.
and I guess like what are you trying to optimize for? Because am I right that most of these colleges are not for profit?
Yeah, well, most of them are public. You're right. Some of them are private. So Duke is private as an example. But the trend, we are seeing some privatization of athletic departments. So we've seen a handful of schools actually take their athletic department and create an LLC and then put it into a new structure. Utah had a landmark deal where private equity came in and actually, put in a large allocation of money for their athletic department, and is moving that into more of a private structure.
So just the athletics department of a college is being privatized and run as a for-profit, but the college itself is a non-profit.
That's right. In certain cases,
That doesn't make any sense.
yeah, it's chaotic. It's wild. It's wild.
That's so crazy. So basically you have these two totally independent organizations, one which is saying we will not try to maximize our profits. We are here for the bettering of the students and their education. And you have another which takes the first name and it's being carved out and privatized and being run for profit. And then they basically have this like tenuous agreement that the people who are benefiting from the revenue share of the for-profit organization have to attend some classes in the non-profit. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, they're still students, so they're members of both, and then some of these privatized departments will receive, in essence, public funding too, right? So
Wow.
it's not true of every school. Many schools just have their, this is a public university and this is our athletic department that's a part of that university, but we are seeing some, model shake on
Yeah.
ownership structures and then the money coming into sports. Sometimes the money will, look to the conference level as well. So there was a private equity deal on the table for the Big Ten conference that was since been at least paused. It hasn't been, agreed to by every member school within the conference, but you'll see a lot of money just kind of flowing in. So, as interested as private equity
Mm.
is in pro sports, now they're coming down market to college. Although I'll say the money in college sports in aggregate is often bigger than a pro league. So
Yeah.
when you start to extrapolate out 363 programs, versus 30-ish teams in the pro leagues, you get some large numbers. I've seen estimates between 15 and 19 billion annually in aggregate.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of money flowing through the system.
Wow. Okay. And so let's talk about some of the things that need innovating, and like specifically on the financial side, how are these contracts being handled? How are the payouts being handled? So if you have a regulator that is 10 people for these hundreds of colleges, like my guess is right now, they're not able to oversee and ensure compliance on a lot of stuff. There's a bit of work to do there. I'm sure they're doing the
Yeah.
best. I'm sure they're doing the best they can, but it sounds like it's a little bit understaffed. And then you have these colleges who are handling potentially like 500 athletes worth of contracts around NIL, ranging from one athlete might be being paid 3-4 million and another might be paying 10 grand, but they still have to understand these contracts, negotiate the contracts, and have triggered payouts. How does all of that, what is the actual technical infrastructure that colleges use to handle this? Is it literally there's a man at a desk with a pile of contracts and then someone sat next to him who makes payments from the college bank account, or is there technology that can actually help all of this?
Yeah, so that is actually what we've seen most of, the human at the desk with another human with a spreadsheet, creating Word docs and putting in pay schedules. Some of the contracts get standardized. So like the
Mm-hmm.
Big Ten has a standard contract, but every contract gets negotiated. So agents will come in and they'll negotiate hard. And these are usually agents that have represented pro athletes or other, so they're not unsophisticated actors. So it's a first time for many of these institutions going back and forth with high profile agents. So even that dynamic is interesting. It's like, how do I negotiate with these counterparties? But a lot of it is as you're describing. A lot of the reporting is as you're describing. It's like I'm gonna click upload to the CSC's portal to submit my roster and my rev share payment, like one contract at a time. Or I'm going to, the student athletes actually are technically required to submit their sponsorship deals through NIL Go. So it's the athlete who's doing it. And
Okay.
that's like a manual upload. Let me fill out the entry. We have seen some tools in the ecosystem. Some of them are like marketplace tools that try to standardize some of the packaging of sponsorship deals. But a lot of what's happening is like these spreadsheets are getting shipped to, finance teams, and these finance teams at schools are putting together payments in whatever possible way they can. PayPal recently signed a deal with the Big Ten to be at least a payment rail.
Mm-hmm.
So the implementation of that, I think, is still on a school to school basis, but you can see that as at least like a last mile for payments, at least simplifying that. So there is some directive guidance on how the financial flows are going to work. And for the most part, it's wallets and it's deposit accounts, but there's so much chatter about, do we want to put $3 million in a Venmo balance, or do we want to actually get it into a wealth management products, or something that's actually advantageous for these student athletes? So
Yeah.
there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. And with a lot of the sponsorship deals that these athletes can strike, my guess is there are maybe quite a lot of small payouts based on number of Instagram posts or walking through the tunnel wearing the shoes or whatever it might be. So is that an area where tokenized payments or stablecoins becomes useful to think about because of the lower cost of these small but frequent payments?
Yeah, we are really digging into, so our product, we're not building it on the blockchain yet, but we're really digging into the because we're partnered actually with some regional, like super regional banks. So we're actually thinking of smart contracts on more or less like a traditional banking infrastructure. That being said, yeah, these payments are often very complicated and for very disparate things. So
Mm-hmm.
they are very tailor suited to this kind of programmatic approach. So you have the ability to provide feedback loops if you could on, hey, I did my seventh social media post, you should release funds, right? And I proved that I was in camera and I had the right logo, which is a big thing, right? You actually need to do your post, but actually wear the right gear. We've actually seen a ton of conflicts there where I'm promoting Nike, but I'm actually wearing Adidas. It's like, okay, let's like tighten that up a little bit. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of permutations of different things there. And you're right, a lot of those things are conditional and milestone based. It's a big, complicated world of potential deals that could be structured and how the payments flow from there.
I feel like I could talk about this for another hour. This is totally fascinating. The I can't really get beyond. It definitely sounds like they're being paid to play. Definitely sounds like the regulators need 100 more people. Definitely sounds like we need some technology in this area to not only help with the contract and the payouts, but also the compliance of all of this. But a super, super interesting area to be working in. And it does feel like there's a huge amount of opportunity for infrastructure players to come in and help make this a lot easier for everybody involved. So just fascinating. Richard, thank you so much for talking me through all of this. And I'm bummed we don't have another hour to keep talking because there's enough here to keep digging in for sure.
Natasha, this was such a pleasure. Sports have been an interesting part of my life for a long time. I think of sports as culture too. So
Yeah.
it's not surprising that many of the decisions that happened in this space became irrational. But if I could share a quick story, we're working with a Southern school, and every time I go down, I land at the airport and I put a specific destination of where I'm going, which is a basketball gym. I always get people vying to pick me up to ask me all about the team. And I'd say about 30% of the time as I leave the cab, it's an older gentleman or woman will thank me for the work I'm doing. And I think, sports are such an important fabric of our lives. We got to sort it out. There needs to be a lot more infrastructure. There needs to be a little bit more guidance, but we'll get there. And it's been an exciting space to dig into. So I appreciate talking with you.
That's so cool. Well, thank you. And I'll speak to you soon.